Yes, to using the chat. Feel free to hop on there. We're going to be interacting and hanging out in the chat function all day. So feel free to use that space as you wish. I see someone from Texas is on. Hi. And this is Dee. Hi, Dee. Hello from small town, Ohio. Hi. And yes, this event is being recorded. So the purpose that this is a webinar is so that we are able to record all of the conversation. For the most part, we're going to be using Q&A, and the panelists are going to be the ones on the video, so you don't have to worry about your face being recorded at all, and as well as the chat box. And yep, that's right, everyone is muted. We have 150 people that are calling in. So we will have, I'll talk through all the Zoom functionality in a second, but we'll have ample opportunity for folks to unmute themselves and contribute to the conversation. All right, so we're gonna get started. I have Maria who is helping with slides and presentations. At this moment, I just wanted to walk you through really quickly on what the objectives are for this webinar. And after that, we are going to be really diving into the agenda, how to use Zoom, and then really getting into the content. So we'll be getting into all of the reasons that we're doing this and also getting comfortable with the issue area. So don't worry, we're gonna get into all the details and I'll be able to answer all your questions about how to access information and be able to return to the content as well, since we know we're all always learning. So Maria, would you mind going to the next slide, please? Great. So the reason that we're doing this is because we know that the internet is a place where a lot of conversations happen. Our peer-to-peer exchanges on social networks can really shift the needle on how issues are perceived and also how public narrative is shaped. We're going to be getting into the meat of the matter, but I just wanted to go over some of the key objectives that we're going to be focusing on. So the first one is that we're going to start off till around 1:45. We're going to be grounding ourselves in theory and purpose. So really understanding some of the academic grounding, some of the research that shows why online engagement can be impactful. The second is that we're going to learn about persuasive messaging. So we're going to be bringing in experts who do this for a living, who really can tell us what the conversations are, what are some of the tactics that the right wing uses to shape discourse around immigration and reproductive rights and climate and transphobia, and how we can begin to shift some of those conversations. So this is going to be a very interactive portion where we're going to be going over some tools and exercises together. We're going to get into practicing, which I do think is the best part. So I have some real exchanges that we have been pulling up and tracking that we'll be actually getting into and practicing together. Then I'll walk you through, this is going to be over the course of both days, by the way. We're not going to get through all of this today, but we'll also talk about joining Slack, which is our online community where we're going to stay connected. And Katie, in response to your question, yes, everyone that graduates from the Digital Defenders cohort has access to a locked website. So that means that it's and I'll walk you through this tomorrow, it's a locked website where you can just put in a unique password, and that way you can access this training as well as resources like toolkits and other readings. So you'll be able to catch up. We see a lot of our digital defenders using this frequently. And then when I'm talking about measuring impact together, I know a lot of you also very generously gave us your social media information. The reason that this is important is because we want to make sure that when we're doing work to counter right-wing narratives, we also want to make sure our communities are safe. So we wanted to make sure that everyone that is on this webinar is real, that we're not engaging with any bots, but also so that we can keep track of each other's exchanges. So similar to how you use Twitter, how you use Facebook, we have a authors list where we have all of your social media handles so we can continue engaging with each other and helping each other out when we're doing this work. And of course, the goal is always to win. The reason that Digital Defenders was launched was because we knew that the time is critical. And we'll be getting into why this moment is the one that we want to be engaging in. But of course, all the work we do in community and in this movement is to win. So on to the next slide, Maria. So we have a really packed schedule. I urge you to take breaks. As I answered to Katie, it's a long day. You know, I'm going to be eating lunch through it. People are going to have to take bio breaks. You're going to have to do various things around the house. I encourage you to do that as you please. And I'll be sure to catch you all up again with the website and the trainings. So to give you a little bit more information about what we're doing today. So we're in the introductions and Zoom portion, and we're going to get into the introductions after this. And then we're going to move into why Digital Defenders. Why are we doing this work over here at the Women's March? What are our shared values? Why is this something that we're doing now? So we'll go over our strategy as well as sort of the history of how Digital Defenders came about. So that you are able to be grounded in community and also to know that there's already a Digital Defenders community that exists. So you'll be joining an existing family of defenders. Then we'll be moving into talking about theory. So we have Professor Heather Woods, who's going to be presenting on some of her unique research and really grounding us in some of her studies about why peer-to-peer exchanges on social networks, on the internet, can really be spaces for political action and engagement. And then we'll be taking a break so that, you know, I know that I am encouraging you to take breaks throughout this, but this is going to be a mandated break for us all to turn off that video, walk around, stretch, and do what you need to do. Hopefully you will all have done the readings. I know I sent lots of reminders, but we're going to be doing some collaborative discussion on the readings that were sent over. And I'll be sure to paste all the readings into the chat box at around 1 p.m. so that you're able to pull them up and refresh yourself on some of the key concepts. From 2:45 to 3:30, we'll be getting into immigrant rights. So we'll have a panelist who is going to be walking you through some of the key tropes, some of the key concepts around immigration. And Dr. Kate Foley said she never received readings, and so did Lola. I will paste them again in the chat box. They should have come with the Zoom link email that you all received for you to sign up. So if you return to that email for the Zoom registration, the readings are within that email. Again, I'll be sure to paste them in the chat box, but whatever registration email you received, the readings are within that email. In addition to that, after the immigrant rights section, we'll be taking another 15-minute break, and then we're going to be getting into talking about transphobia. What does it look like for transphobia to exist in feminist spaces? This is something that we as feminists know is true, and we want to be better. We want to know how to talk to fellow feminists about why and how transphobia is not something that we can allow in our movements. And then we'll be going over some housekeeping as well as getting into the questions and answers and tomorrow's agenda. On to the next slide, Maria. And then this is just a overview of what Sunday's gonna look like. Again, as I mentioned, it's okay if you need to step out for a bit, and you can always catch up with the recording. We will be graduating only Digital Defenders that attended both training sets, because both days have some unique critical content. So regardless of when you need to dip in and out, please do attend both days to the best of your ability. So tomorrow, we're going to go over the Slack tutorial. I'll be walking you through how we use Slack, which is a platform for communicating quickly. It's a collaborative chat space. We'll be going into climate and how we see climate justice be talked about online and what we can do to correct the record. Again, we'll be taking another 15-minute break, and then we'll be spending some time talking about reproductive rights and freedom. I'm particularly excited about this section because with reproductive rights and freedom, there's actually a lot that has been happening this week in terms of Supreme Court cases. So a lot of the practicing that we'll be doing will be around some real conversations that we've been seeing emerge around the issue. 2:15 to 3:30, we'll be spending a little bit of time with Rachel Carmona from the Women's March, who is going to be talking about how we have these conversations. So how do we find positive allies, how we engage with them, and some tips and tricks on the narrative. From 3:30 to 4:30, we will be off Zoom, and we will have you all actually practice a little bit with some of the tweets and conversations that I've been mentioning, and then we'll come back and debrief some of our work and do some Q&A. So I'm going to pause there for a second and just go over some of the questions that are coming up in the chat box. So one of them is no new Zoom link. The Zoom link that you received is the one that also signed you up for tomorrow, so you don't need to worry about that. It's going to be the same Zoom link. In regards to Rosemary's question, yep, those are exactly the readings that I'm mentioning. When I mentioned the email that you all received, that was the one with the Zoom registration link, nothing attached to Zoom. It's the one that was informing you of your acceptance and giving you further materials. The materials that are linked in that email are the readings that we'll be discussing. So those initial readings are all you need to really focus on for today. And another note that I have from folks is, yes, you're coming tomorrow anyway. So I'm glad to hear that. So what I'm going to do is just paste those readings into the chat box so that you all have them. So give me just a moment. These are the unity principles. This is what we'll be discussing first. These are the principles from our partners, Mi Gente. The Women's March unity principles. And 3 very informative articles. So here is one of them. Here is another one. And the New York Times one. And I hear you, Deborah, on the pain of paywalls. Information should be free. Don't worry about it. I think that even if we have a few folks that read it and are able to share some highlights, hopefully that'll help generate the conversation and catch you up. Agreed, Alyssa, that the media manipulation article really changed my life. I learned a lot from that one. All right, so those readings are in the chat, and again, I'll bump them up again, but we have a little bit of time before we get into them, so I would just recommend, pulling them up and having them ready and on the go. So we'll move into the next slide, please, Maria. All right, so raise your hand if you've used Zoom before. 10, 22, 34. All right, so we have a fair amount of people. I would say the majority that have used Zoom before, so that's great. But it's okay if you haven't, because I know that there's a lot of ways that people are communicating and working online right now. So I just wanted to give you a quick rundown of the functions of Zoom that we're going to be using today. So the first one is the chat function, and a lot of you are already in it and you're using it exactly how we want to use it. So that's where you want to be having your constant conversations. If you have just general questions about the training, so maybe you put in a good question. Yes, we actually had over 900 people sign up for these trainings, so we're going to be doing several sets of these. So don't worry. Feel free to just shoot me an email at digitaldefenders@womensmarch.com and let me know if you're unable to make it, and I'll be sure that you get an invite for the next one. But if you have a migraine or are feeling ill, I definitely want you to take care of yourself. So again, chat function, we're going to be using it a lot. Next slide, please. So Q&A function, if you see the Q&A box on the side, that is going to be used for our formal Q&A session. So there's going to be times where we actually have some formal Q&A with some prompts, with some answers, and we will advise you to use the Q&A function for that. So I know that Heather's going to be using the Q&A function in her section. So that's where you actually input questions and then we answer them in the turn that they were received. Next. Raise hand. A lot of you did this already. So when you see the raise hand function, this is really going to be for when we want to see who wants to respond to a question. So as you know, this is a webinar format, so that means everyone's muted. But if you raise your hand and are someone who's willing to share in response to a question, I will unmute you again in the order that I see it, so that I am able to broadcast you to the full group. So don't worry, when we are using that function, I'll be sure to prompt you. So we can pause. Actually, let's go to the next one too. Great. So I'm going to pause there and see if there's any Zoom questions. So I'm seeing that some folks are unable to copy and paste from the chat. So what I will recommend doing in that case is if you are able to put in the actual titles in Google, if that's not working for you. So I know that Teddy had pasted them, but if you just put in these words on Google, they should be able to come up right away. Drag the links into another document. Also something we can do and actually have that ready. So hold on just a second. Thank you, Judy. And let's make that happen so that you all have everything you need. Hold on just a second. Judy said attendees can drag the links, and that is also true. So give me just a second to get that started for you all. And thank you, Judy, for the suggestion and also advising on how people can make this happen. All right. And share. All right. So that's the link where you all should be able to access the readings, and it is viewable by all. And I see some folks on it already. So thank you for hopping on that. All right. Any other questions on Zoom specifically? Great. So I have some folks that are answering the prompt, so thank you very much. So if everyone could use the chat function and answer the following questions: name, pronoun, city and state, what brought you here, and your favorite internet personality. And feel free to not just limit it to social justice or advocacy work. There's a lot of internet personalities out there, so feel free to get creative and be honest. So just give it a few more minutes, but I'd love to hear from everyone. All right. So we have Anne from Dover, Ohio, who wants to be more involved and loved the vibe for the 2017 March. We have someone from Upper Marlboro, Maryland, close to me. I'm in DC. Colorado Women's March leader, Ricky from Grand Junction. Liz, I like your vibe from Pennsylvania, advocacy work and some art. We have folks from Florida, Pennsylvania, California. Yes to the Snoop Dogg. I think that his internet presence is excellent. And Jamila Jamil, also excellent. Deborah, I too am a Robert Wright fan. And yes, New Zealand Prime Minister is incredible and such an inspiration. We have folks that are here to gain new skills, Denver, and do work with the labor community. And Amanda from DC, like me. And we have a wonderful international presence from London. I know we had someone else from India, New Mexico, Pittsburgh. I too am an NPR fan. More folks from Texas. Jody from Arkansas. Yes, Jonathan Van Ness as well. Virginia, Cambridge, Maryland, more Colorado. Lots of DC and Maryland. I'm happy to see that. Missouri, Michigan, LA. Chica from DC, Ohio, Texas, Massachusetts, Baltimore. All right, we have folks from all over the country. The snarky associate dean. I'm trying to remember who that is, Teddy. I feel like I know this answer. Heather. Alyssa from Illinois. Spice Adams. Trevor Noah. And Leslie, take your time and come back to us with your favorite. All right, so we have folks from everywhere. I am so excited at the geographical representation. I am from DC. I am originally from Islamabad, Pakistan. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm the coordinator for the Digital Defenders Program with the Women's March. And in the past, I have been working with the Women's March Network, but then also working on our mass mobilizations and direct actions. One of my favorite things is skills building and training, and I see that translate now into the digital space, and really seeing that we can really shape conversations when we all are doing it together, when we're all learning together, and when we're really practicing and collaborating. So I hope that you can also scroll through the chat and see some of the great new internet personalities that I had not seen. And Teddy, I'm going to be checking out the snarky associate dean for sure. So let's move on to the next slide, Maria. All right, so I'm going to just be, so thank you for asking, Christina. Noor. So it's just like a two O's, Noor. So a little bit less like door and a little bit more of a long O, but I appreciate you asking. Thank you. All right, so I wanted to just ground us in why we're here, what our vision and purpose is, and how Digital Defenders really came about. So we can go to the next slide, Maria. All right, friends. So the reason that we're here is because we know, as I mentioned earlier, that the internet can be a place of good. Oftentimes, when we really started thinking about this training, we were contemplating whether people would be interested in working on some persuasive messaging and really doing it on a large scale and not really engaging with the trolls online. We're just not at that place yet. So we decided that we would start off by really pulling together a mass online deep canvassing operation that aims to be effective, that aims to be accessible, that aims to engage people one-on-one online and on the networks that we use already, right? We're all using Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. Some folks are on Reddit, and we use these every day. We get into fights with people once in a while. I know that my internet presence, I would appreciate if you didn't Google me, but if you did, you would find that it's a lot of cats, but it's also a lot of fighting with people. And Digital Defenders has really switched how I approach my interactions online and also who I choose to engage with. So the reason and the purpose behind Digital Defenders is that we know that national sentiments around most progressive issues trend negatively online. And this is largely due to intentional misinformation campaigns, led by the alt-right and by online trolls. And right now, especially in this moment, we're all witnessing how these coordinated campaigns can really flourish in a global pandemic. So dangerous origin myths, right-wing reopen campaigns, and the intentional dissemination of false medical guidance online have shaped public opinion. I know Heather's going to be going into this a little bit, but thinking about the pandemic video, right, the viral video, and feel free to add your thoughts about that in the chat box, but we really saw that take over the internet this past week. We saw people that we deeply care about take that advice seriously and wonder if the advice that was being given to them by doctors and by other agencies like the CDC was real. So that was really, to me, another added sign of why it's important for us to be out there, for us to be resourcing people that genuinely care and want to do well, and be able to bring them in gently to the right side. So another point that I wanted to bring up is that we're also more vulnerable right now to our online spaces being misused and manipulated, especially because we're seeing an increased usage of social networks globally. I recently read Facebook and Instagram released a report that there was a 50% increase in messaging across users, and Twitter reported a jump of nearly 25%. So just grounding us in this moment as we head into this next crucial election cycle in the midst of a global health pandemic, we know that division and the spread of political misinformation online will be especially high. So it's more important than ever that Digital Defenders continues growing, that we continue recruiting our friends so that we can be the progressive movement's digital front lines. Just so you all know, and I know I alluded to this already, the Digital Defenders program has been going on for a while. So we actually already have around 150 trained Digital Defenders. We started last fall. We had a training session in March, and we're now in our May training series. So we're intending to have multiple a month because we had such high interest in this training sessions. We're going to be adding a few more throughout the month, and we'll generally be doing them at least monthly, and of course updating them with different content. So just to talk through why we're here. I already mentioned that social media can be a source of good. It can be a medium of positive political discourse, even though we don't see that happen too often. There are times when we see it and it rejuvenates us and empowers us. And it's also means of uniting people over shared values. And we'll be getting into the shared values a little bit more. But really, there are things that we all believe in. And sometimes it can be really hard to spot those. But through this program, we'll be thinking through how to really specify those values, how to bring them out in other people so that we can move them closer to the goal. The second one is hard to really grasp, especially if you're cynical like me. But I have seen through this program that when people know better, they do better. And when opinions change, behavior changes. So knowing that we're doing this to shape public narrative, to shape public opinion, and to do it in a way that's accessible and friendly. As I mentioned earlier, we are not engaging with trolls online. So we're not going into the dungeons and finding people with whom we want to fight and who want to fight with us. What we're working on is persuasive messaging that really helps us understand what the fear structure is, what is the underlying reasoning that is moving people to respond in the ways they respond. And how are we seeing some of our allies engage in this moment, right? How are we seeing people that might see a thread where you're seeing someone say something that is almost there, but that might not encourage other people to really understand the issue, right? I'm someone that says, well, hashtag Google it, right? I don't have time to tell you what I'm talking about. So we're doing the opposite of that. What we're doing is actually using an empowerment strategy to encourage positive allyship. So seeing the people that are wanting to do better, that need a little guidance, that need more folks to come and say, hey, you know what, you're on the right track, and I just want to let you know that I would maybe shift your narrative a little bit. Here's another way that you could approach this, but you're doing great. And I just want you to know that I see you and I hear you. A lot of us don't hear that positive affirmation and encouragement a lot, and we know that it works. The last one is that we're going to be ourselves and we're going to be using our own voices. So you're going to be seeing a lot of different templates that have been tried and tested by messaging experts throughout this presentation as well as tomorrow. But you're you. You talk the way you talk. You are funny, you're cynical, you are your own voice, you are your own persona. And we, regardless of the templates that we present, just know that this is about you and how you use the internet, the platforms that you frequent, as long as we're on the same page about the fact that we are encouraging positive allyship. We're not engaging with trolls no matter how hard it is, but show up as yourself, because that is authentic, and we believe that presenting yourself as yourself is the best way to move people. So on to the next slide, please. Great. So just wanted to go over some of the strategies that we're using. So the first one is that we're going to be shifting the ground of the conversation to offense instead of defense, so that we can really show solidarity while shifting the frame of discussion. So for instance, if someone's saying, hey, Noor, you know, you're so on point when you say that families should stay together. However, don't forget that Trump is the only president who has separated families instead of giving foreign aid to prevent migrants from coming here. We could solve this problem in much kinder ways. So instead of just saying, well, families should stay together, you're able to actually add some value, add some resources to help folks understand the full context, right? And also appealing to their values about this is the choice that Trump made. The next one is actually on point with what you just said, Rosemary, which is in regards to rights-based messaging. We know that rights-based messaging and statistics rarely convince people or sway them. This is something that we saw in the marriage equality movement, and this is also something that was underscored in the Movement Advancement Project's framework for discussing marriage equality. So when people say LGBTQ people have the right to get married, that wasn't advancing the conversation, but instead framing it as LGBTQ people should be able to marry who they love. That's what drew people in, because that's what anybody can relate to. So we're going to be going into this in a little bit more depth throughout the training, but really thinking about how facts and links don't really change people. It's a good addition when you're trying to explain a point, or you want to point someone to another personal story that might shift them, but we're not going to be using that as our starting point. We're going to be appealing to values. Another point that I wanted to bring up was in terms of affirmation. I know that personally, something I love is being affirmed. So that means that when I'm doing well and I'm trying, it's my instinct to desire somebody telling me, hey, you did a good job. Here's a pat on the back for what you did. So we are going to be starting off and really testing how with every interaction, we are also affirming and encouraging further interaction. So expressing solidarity, expressing understanding, and relaying that we see you, we hear you, and here are some ways that I can have your back in this conversation. The last point is accessibility. So I know that Professor Heather Woods is going to be presenting in a little bit, but something that she brings up in her book is around accessibility and language. So one point is that we're often criticized for being inaccessible, for being lofty, for not being able to actually talk to people as people, right? That's something that the right critiques progressives for. And in the book, it says, you have to read 15 books on feminist theory before they'll talk to you. We don't want to be pushing that. We want to keep our messaging accessible, something that anybody of any age can relate to, so that this indicates that they're welcome into our movement as well. And by keeping our framework positive and educational, we're making it clear that we are the ones who are accepting and bringing them in. And down the line, this can attract people who turn to the internet out of alienation or isolation. So really showing that we welcome you. We are people. We're not going to tell you to go read an entire book for you to be able to participate in this conversation. We're telling you that we see you as you, and we relate to you because we have shared values. So that is the some of our main tenets that you'll see repeated throughout this training, that you'll see reflected in some of our tools and exercises. And again, when we get into the practicing, we'll be able to really workshop some of these. So on to the next. All right. So what I'm going to do is have you all take a few minutes to really pull up 2 links. And again, I think that these are ones that you should all be able to find, but we'll also be screen sharing them. This is the Mi Gente Principles of Unity, and these are the Women's March mission and principles. And again, take 5 minutes, take till 12:45 to pull these up and review them if you haven't already. And I am also pasting them into the links document, which I will also bump for all of you so that you have them on the ready. And Rosie, do you mean the agenda for the training, or do you mean the women's agenda? For the training, yeah. Maria, could you scroll back to the slide with the agenda? I think that was way back. Keep going, yep. So I'll keep this up for now, Rosie, so you can look at it. And for everyone else, please take around 5 minutes to read through the 2 sets of principles. Again, they're in the chat box as well as in the links document that has been pasted in the chat box. And going back to the questions, That's a really good question, Ellie, and I appreciate you bringing it up. I think I would say that that's always been my struggle with how I, like as a non-Black organizer, show up in spaces, and completely understand and agree with what you're coming up, the point that you're bringing up. Um, and I know that Amanda from Mi Gente is going to go over this in her presentation. And Heather, I hope that we can also maybe go over this in depth when we're talking through a little bit of the theory in your presentation as well. But I hear you, and I think that's important in terms of positivity and how positivity is perceived and by whom. And Allison, that's right. We're going to be looking at the Mi Gente and Women's March principles for these questions. And Judy, the questions from attendees come only to the presenters. Yep, it was a question from Ellie talking about how to really think about positivity and how it's perceived in when we're talking about positive sentiment-based messaging. So really thinking through what it would look like for or how experiences are different for Black organizers or activists on spaces versus non-Black organizers, and how that sentiment can be perceived as different and not necessarily be perceived as positive, which I think is an important point for us to discuss. So I was just responding to Ellie saying that that's something that I know we will address later in the training, but then also hoping we can get a little bit deeper into it. All right, so just 2 more minutes if we can really look into the principles. And I think folks are still trying to are still trying to look at the links from the chat. So I'm just going to bump this again. The links for all the readings that we're going to be discussing today are in this document that I just pasted into the chat. All right. So we're going to actually do some shared reading together. So Maria, if you wouldn't mind pulling up the principles and just making that. Yep. All right. So I'm going to start off with just reading the mission, and then we're actually going to pull some of you all in to do some reading together. So just reading the mission. The mission of Women's March is to harness the political power of diverse women and their communities to create transformative social change. Women's March is a women-led movement providing intersectional education on a diverse range of issues and creating entry points for new activists and organizers to engage in their local communities through trainings, outreach programs, and events. Women's March is committed to dismantling systems of oppression through nonviolent resistance and building inclusive structures guided by self-determination, dignity, and respect. Maria, if you could scroll down to reproductive rights. All right, so could I have a volunteer to read the reproductive rights section? And you could just raise your hand. All right, Judy, you were first, so I'm going to unmute you now. And you might have to unmute yourself on your end as well.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right. This is Judy from Mountain, Maryland, and it says, we believe in reproductive freedom. We do not accept any federal, state, or local rollbacks, cuts, or restrictions on our ability to access quality. Reproductive health care services, birth control, HIV/AIDS care and prevention, or medically accurate sexuality education. This means open access to safe, legal, affordable abortion and birth control for all people, regardless of income, location, or education.
Thank you, Judy. All right, I'm going to mute you again. And let's go down, Maria. All right. Amy, I'm going to unmute you now. And I would love if you could read out the part on immigrant rights.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hi, Amy from Philly. And immigrant rights, rooted in the promise of America's call for huddled masses yearning to breathe free, we believe in immigrant and refugee rights regardless of status or country of origin. We believe migration is a human right and that no human being is illegal.
Thank you, Amy. Appreciate it. And can I have one other volunteer? Gunda, I hope that I'm pronouncing your name right, but you're unmuted now. If you could read out the piece on environmental justice, that would be excellent. You might have to unmute yourself on your end.
We believe that every person and every community in our nation has the right to clean water, clean air, and access to and enjoyment of public lands. We believe that our environment and our climate must be protected and that our land and natural resources cannot be exploited for corporate gain or greed, especially not at the risk of public safety and health.
Thank you so much. All right, Maria, could we shift to the Mi Gente principles of unity? Thank you. So I wanted to, I'm just going to read this myself, but I wanted to really highlight what my comrades from Mi Gente have taught me that I see really rooted in these principles. So the first one is around transformative change. So we believe transformative change requires more from us, not just more of us. And even though this is specific to the Latinx and Chicana community, I also think that this is applicable to everyone. So knowing that we need to organize, spark, sustain, and nurture movements to ensure that transformative change happens and combat the ways that our community is held back. We see that our liberation is bound to Black liberation, Indigenous sovereignty, economic and climate justice, and other liberation movements. And could we scroll down, Maria? I love this one. We are creating a leaderful space that is accountable, transparent, and most importantly, continues evolving. We have too many climbers and not enough lifters. For too long, many of those who claim to be leaders of the Latinx and Chicana community have served themselves first rather than demonstrating the courage to work and live in the service of community, lifting itself up. Again, even though this is specific to Mi Gente and their base, I feel like this resonates with my community. I feel like this resonates with my Muslim community. And I turn to this principle of leaderful spaces often when I'm organizing with my own people. Is that we often see this in elected leaders, but these dynamics are not limited to political office. Trust and power are lost when community leaders are unaccountable, when they don't share information, when you close off input and room for others' leadership. We need more, not less leadership. And we seek to lift up all the different forms of leadership people bring to justice work. And Digital Defenders is one of them, right? This is one facet of the work that all of you do. I know that we have authors in this chat box. We have people that do advocacy work for a living, and then we also have a lot of people that don't. And Digital Defenders is a place where you can use the social networks that you use every single day. We're not asking for anyone to do it to create anything special. We're merely giving you the tools to bring other people over to the side that you're already on. Could you scroll down, Maria? Number 6, We don't throw each other away. The word family carries significant and sometimes painful meaning. We do not take it lightly, and our experiences show us that it is complicated. Whether it is family is determined by blood or family we choose, it takes work. There will be mistakes and growing edges, and they will have impacts. We know that everyone is capable of being harmful and of being harmed. Conflict is inevitable and necessary for honest discourse and unity across difference. We believe building a space that can hold disagreement can lead to greater accountability, resilience, and anti-fragility. This means we don't condone call-outs and exiling each other, of playing oppression Olympics with each other. But this also means we don't allow things to fester inside. The state has often robbed us all of our ability to transform conflict and hold relationships with one another. Thus, we believe principled struggle is central to our capacity to self-govern and build for the long haul. So I'll stop there and let's go back to the training slides. I know a lot of you have been answering these questions, and you should feel free to keep putting them back in the chat box. But I just wanted to read out some of you all's responses. So hearing that what resonates with a lot of folks is sustaining transformation for safe spaces for everyone to have freedom. For in particular with Mi Gente, about us needing to be open to continuous change, which I agree with. I think that we have a lot of experts and we rely on expert knowledge to teach us a lot of things. But at the end of the day, we're all learning, we're all continuously learning, and that's the purpose of this. It seems like folks resonate with the emphasis on intersectionality, also a constant learning for everyone in terms of white feminism and how it can exclude and continues to exclude women of color, but specifically Black women. And also thinking about how to help everyone achieve equality in each area, something Lorraine brought up, realizing that raising your neighbor up does not mean you're holding yourself back. Positive messaging rather than confrontation. Between both sets of principles, Katie brings up the overarching values of community and inclusion, and it is so important that we represent everyone. And Allison, I agree with you. Lifters versus climbers, I actually really appreciated that messaging and it stuck with me for a little bit. And representing everyone in our movement. Victoria bringing up the idea of servant leadership. So knowing that we are here to serve our communities, first and foremost and always. And also knowing that these principles work pretty well together, but also knowing that Mi Gente's principles are something that they use to guide their work for their base, but seeing what we can take out of that applies to all the work we do across movements. So for me, even though I am not I am not part of Mi Gente's base, and I don't do work with the Latinx community, like I mentioned, I do feel as though a lot of the principles in that document can be very easily translated to current conflicts and current tension that I'm feeling with my Muslim community. Prachi brings up what resonated most with me was Mi Gente's principles, emphasis on decolonizing our minds. And I'm also seeing the ones that resonate with me are the ones that are short and direct. We don't throw each other away. This circles back to being accessible. A lot of mission statements tend to have more complex sentence structure and vocabulary, which makes it harder to relate quickly. And I appreciate you tying in those things because I do agree that oftentimes we don't really understand what organizations are doing. And I think the way this was worded makes it a lot easier for us to understand. Rosemary, more listening than talking, emphasis on possibilities of applying new technologies to messaging strategies. And yes, the right is very good at this, which is why we're going to get better. And shared values, the family metaphor works better with identity group formations than with formations that have come across many divides. Agreed. And I think that's why I saw that apply really well to Mi Gente's principles, but also understanding how you can bring that back to your communities, right? If you identify as as a mother, or as a white mother, how can you bring in some of the lessons from Mi Gente and how they hold conflict in their particular family with your community as well? And Sophia says, so much resonates, but from the Mi Gente principles, I appreciate the need to unlearn the harmful values forced upon us through colonization. I'm the first in my family that has stopped judging myself for my brown skin and curly hair. Inclusion, recognition, and alliance, transformative change, diverse leadership. And Evan brought up the idea of more from us, not just more of us, is very encouraging and empowering. When we focus where we have and can use our power, rather than obsessing on where we do not have power, we are more effective and efficient. I really appreciate the way that you worded that, Evan. So just gonna switch back to the raising hand because I actually love hearing all of your voices. Is if I could have 3 volunteers articulate what you see are movements fighting for, not against, based on what you read. So I see Susan. So Susan, if you could just give us like a quick 30-second response to that. And you are unmuted.
It'll be an honor. I'll definitely say that what I saw thus far, it has to be like, it's more of unity of intersectional than the divide where I live in Philadelphia. So it's more like a unified, systematic in more ways than one.
Thank you, Susan. I appreciate the way that you said systematic in more ways than one. And I think the reason that I appreciate the way that you said that is because it takes practice. And I think this actually also fits in with what you just said, River, on intersectionality requires nuance. And I agree with that because I think the reason that we're honing in on so many issue areas when we are going into our training is because we can't talk about climate justice without talking about reproductive rights. We can't talk about reproductive rights without talking about transphobia. And we cannot talk about all of these things without understanding the impacts of white supremacy and colonization, and also how it shows up in a lot of our movement spaces, right? So I appreciate you bringing that up, Susan, and I appreciate you pointing that out as well, River, is that I think a lot of us can say intersectional, but we need to be putting it into practice. And hopefully through rigorous study and continuous learning, we can get there. Can I have one more person answer that question? Can you articulate what you see are movements fighting for, not against? And feel free to raise your hand. Victoria, you are unmuted.
I see us fighting for the value of every human life. Especially through the pandemic, I see that there are some lives that are not as valued as others. And I just feel like we are trying to show everyone that they're valued.
Thank you, Victoria. And I agree. I think that, what we're seeing in the pandemic is the way that capitalism functions is like finally displayed for a lot of people whose eyes maybe weren't open to it before, of actually seeing how the values-based system that places more emphasis on profit over people is finally visible to folks that it wasn't visible to before, right? For a lot of folks in this country, the pandemic is what they've been living in. This is what communities have been experiencing for so long in terms of food insecurity, in terms of over-policing, in terms of surveillance, in terms of health disparities. And now we're seeing, folks, a lot of folks really open up because they're seeing it impact them. So I appreciate you bringing that up, and especially how it ties to this moment and how value and shared values are more important than ever before. So I'm going to have us move to the next slide, Maria. And I am so excited that we have Professor Heather Woods, who is the co-author of Make America Meme Again. And I know that we actually have Leslie, who is a co-collaborator with Heather on this as well. So welcome, Leslie, and I know you're in the chat. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Heather, to talk us through some of the theory, some of the studies that you have created, and some of the knowledge that you've gathered over so many years about why what we're doing is important. So over to you.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much, Noor. I'm so excited to be here with you today. Again, my name is Heather Woods. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an assistant professor of rhetoric and technology at Kansas State University. So hello from Manhattan, Kansas, the Little Apple. I also advise the Women's March on Digital Strategy and Digital Defenders Program. I've been researching communication and technology for about a decade. I study movements online, how people use social media and hashtags to find one another and to act together, both online and offline, how internet culture, and particularly memes, influence our society and political scenes. And I also study smart homes and artificial intelligence. So that's sort of my focus. I am the co-author of Make America Meme Again, the rhetoric of the alt-right. Hello to my co-author, Leslie, who's in the chat. She's outstanding. And it's a book about memes and politics. And I'll get into that a little bit later. So I know that we have about 45 minutes together and as part of this larger Defenders training. And here's how we're going to use that time. We're going to break it up into 2 chunks with a Q&A period after each part. Noor and the awesome Women's March facilitators are going to help me gather your questions and responses. In the first section, I want to share some of the insights from my research in the field studying memes. That's sort of the theory I think that Noor's been talking about. And then in the second section, I'll put these insights into actionable items that you can accomplish and what the rest of the Digital Defenders training is largely going to be about. So first, I would appreciate if you could enter into the chat box what social or digital media that you use and who do you communicate with on that digital or social media. So again, please enter into the chat box what types of social or digital media do you use and who do you communicate with on that social media.
Awesome. And folks, you can do it to all panelists or all attendees.
Okay. I see Facebook from a lot of folks. For family, I see Twitter for news, Mighty Networks, Twitter for professional reasons, Instagram for coworkers. I see a lot of you sort of use different platforms for different reasons. So like Facebook for friends and friends of friends, Instagram. Influencers, I see that you're using it to connect to industry leaders. Okay. Family connection and colleagues, Twitter for hobbies. I see several of you manage several Facebook pages. Twitter for news and social justice. Tumblr, Slack and Teams. Nice. So it sounds like you all are all over the internet. And that you use a lot of different platforms. And it seems to me like you've got a sense that different platforms do different things with different people, and that's great. That is sort of the first step, I think, in understanding social media, is that there's lots of different ways to communicate with people, and that different platforms might be better to get certain things over others. So like I see a lot of you get Twitter for news and politics updates, and you have friends and family on Facebook. That's great. That's great. So social media is a powerful tool for communication, including peer-to-peer communication, but also peer-to-group communication. And it is important in particular for political communication, which is the topic sort of our conversation today. And it's a space where we can participate in positive political discourse. It is a place where we influence people, but it's also a place where we ourselves are influenced. It's where change is built and where democracy can thrive. But it's also a place where misinformation and hatred and violence can spread and circulate very, very quickly. And that's at least in part, what Digital Defenders is about, responding to the less than positive aspects of online communication. Now, one of the reasons that Leslie and I wrote our book, Make America Meme Again, is because we were interested to find out how a particular communication format, the meme, influenced politics. And we used the 2016 election as a case study. And we found that a great deal of our conversations about politics happen online in social media spaces. And as I saw in the chat, many of us get our news online, we deliberate about issues online, we form and nurture relationships online. It's an important space for us to do communication work. It's also important to note that, oh, there's a corgi back there, sorry. Many, if not most of these spaces were not designed for politics, right? But that doesn't mean that people aren't using them for political purposes. It does mean we have to think about what these spaces communicate when we use them for political purposes. Our book showed that during the 2016 election, memes were very important forms of political communication, in part because people were using memes to have really nuanced conversations about policy, really intense, even sometimes like theoretical conversations about policy, but in a really condensed format of a meme, right? They were using memes to persuade, and in some places they were used to intimidate and prevent democratic deliberation. There's even research to show that foreign agents, namely Kremlin-backed Internet Research Agency, used memes to influence political conversations and ultimately political elections. In this way, social media can be weaponized, political communication can be weaponized, and memes can be weaponized. So I've been using this term meme, which you may be familiar with. Traditionally, memes are shorthands, like funny internet content comprised of images overlaid with text. So one sort of traditional old school example are the lolcat memes, LOL cats, and it was just funny pictures of cats with impact font text over the top of them, right? Since then, memes have shifted over time, and now they're quite complex. Memes mean different things to different people. They move quickly in and outside of communities, and as they do so, they take ideas with them. They move to shape political discourse when they move around different parts of the internet. There is a really interesting Atlantic article on the Karen meme in the context of the pandemic. Can you raise your hand if you've heard of the Karen meme? Okay. So I see around 35 of you, 36, have heard of the Karen meme. So Karen is typically sort of a white middle-class woman who really wants to speak to a manager or is interested in, getting something done her particular way. And this meme, which is quite old, has taken on new meaning during the time of coronavirus, such that the coronavirus Karen has become a villain for different people, right? So for some, coronavirus Karen is a middle-aged woman, a white woman who demands to get her hair cut in the pandemic, right? Open up the economy so that I can get a haircut. For others, coronavirus Karen is a busybody who calls the police on neighborhood kids who are not sufficiently social distancing, right? So in fact, Karen has been used for a long time to critique racial and economic privilege, but its meaning shifts depending on who is using it. And I think that the Karen meme is really interesting because it shows how really complex ideas about privilege, about class, about race, about gender get sort of compressed into these images and sometimes videos and sometimes other formats, and that these memes mean different things to different people. And as they travel around in different circles, they pick up different meanings over time. So this small example shows the power of memes, that they carry complex ideas across different parts of the internet, that they can be used to empower, they can be used to critique, or they can gloss over inequalities and sow division. Memes can certainly be used to share facts, but nobody really fact checks a meme. And so they can also be used to signal very particular virtues, shared virtues. So our book shows that during the 2016 election, the alt-right was especially good at using social media, and in particular, memes to influence American political discourse. The alt-right is a pretty amorphous group of people, meaning that they're comprised of like sort of a loose group who don't always share ideas or perspectives or values in common, but memes helped them form a coalition to appear coherent, like they were a powerful group, and to influence political discourse in ways that undercut democratic action and were bad for democracy. They had some help from what we call the alt-right ecosystem, which is a collective of social media sites, networks, news outlets, bots, so-called think tanks, and more. And these ecosystems would create and then amplify content, much of which was very politically charged, much of which was misleading, many components of which were violent and white supremacist, and they would use these networks to make them appear to be a legitimate political force. Sometimes legitimate institutions would further amplify these messages, and even the White House and the president would retweet or reference these ideas in official channels. And this is one way that far-right ideals made their way into mainstream outlets online. Memes are a key tool for political communication because they aren't specific to a particular platform. They're supposed to be silly. They're not supposed to be political. People don't take them seriously because they seem silly. And after all, who fact checks a meme? No one does that. So whether or not they appear to be important, memes and more broadly, communication online is a key aspect of political communication in the 21st century. And much more generally, a lot of important political conversation is happening online. And this is where you, digital defenders, come in. So let me pause here for questions before we move on to sort of actionable items.
Again, folks, use the Q&A box. That would be wonderful, so we can keep the chat to our lively conversation about masculine equivalents of Karen.
I'm just catching up to that now.
So any questions? Ooh, all right. We have one from Catherine. Heather, would you prefer if I wait for a few to come in and then give them all to you, or do them one by one?
I'll defer to you. How about you yeah.
All right, so I'm gonna start with the first one because I actually think they're all pretty different. So the first one is from Catherine, and it is a broad one, but a good one. How do you counteract a meme?
That's a really great question. That's a really great question. And there is some debate about it. What my co-author and I suggest is that we use memes in a more productive way, or that we find ways to respond to the messaging that's within inside the meme itself. And part of that has to do with making sure that we know that memes can be powerful, that they can have a communicative that they shape political discourse. That's step one, right? Some people think memes are silly and therefore we shouldn't pay attention to them. But we have some pretty good evidence that memes are shaping political communication. So step one is recognizing that that is the case. Step two is participating in programs like this to recognize that political communication happens in online spaces and learning how to respond to that in our own way, in ways that are positive and affirmative and that influence people in our networks. Because you are an influencer, right? You are somebody who in your networks, people look to you, whether or not they say it, right? They're part of a larger system and you get to influence how people think. And that's a great responsibility. So having training like this is really helpful. And then I think I'm on 3 or 4. The fourth step is, I think I saw this in the chat, we can't only use facts and statistics to counteract memes which are counterfactual or that have misinformation in them. What we have to do is we have to recognize that some of these memes are about fear, right? Or about anxiety, or about anger or hatred. And if we can get to the root of those and respond to them with values that are positive to us and the movement that we want to be a part of, then we can counteract some of the most powerful parts of that meme.
Thank you, Heather. And thank you, Catherine, for asking that question. The next one is, any specifics on who responds, is from Victoria. Asking any specifics about who responds regarding to memes from age, race, education, and gender.
Yeah, another really great question. What we know from the research is that there is this belief that memes are only for the youth, only for, kids on the internet, right? That kids on the internet have a particular language, that language is meme culture or digital culture, and that is specific to them. We know that that is not true. In our book, we use a lot of examples of people who are older, who have been participating in meme culture without maybe knowing what it is, right? Sometimes they'll share memes without knowing all of the context. And I would say that there's not like a particular race or gender or age, that memes are really powerful because they sort of go across all of those. And they help people communicate within those communities. And that is what we need to respond to, is the ability for digital communication to reach different populations at different time, and don't just assume that it's one group of people who are susceptible to memes and meme culture.
Thanks, Heather.
Yeah.
I'm gonna bundle together some questions because I'm sensing a theme, which is around fact checking, knowing when memes are off, knowing that they can spread disinformation, false news. So could you talk to us a little bit through that, about how false news, can show up on memes, how we can spot it, and how, we can fact check some of these things?
Yeah, so you all are so smart. These are such great questions. And the fact that you're thinking through them is a really stellar thing. And I find when I teach memes, and Leslie, maybe you can jump in a little bit, because we're both teachers, and so we teach courses on memes, or sections of courses on memes, and this question comes up a lot. And oftentimes our students sort of tell us that there is, for lack of a better word, a BS test. Like if you see something and it smells fishy, that's generally a good sign that something is going wrong in those spaces. So absolutely, memes can traffic bad information, misinformation for two reasons. One, again, because we don't think that they seem to be politically powerful, but they are. And two, because no one fact checks a meme. So absolutely, we should respond when we see memes sharing false information. And in addition to that sort of response, you want to make sure that you're, if people are using memes in an argument, that you're responding to the underlying sort of context from which they're sort of issuing the meme. So like if they send a meme that is about, I don't know, immigrants taking Americans' jobs, right? That is something that you can counteract with evidence, but you can also counteract it with a values-based approach in which you respond with shared values. And I think that there's going to be some discussion about this later on in the Digital Defenders program. But recognizing memes for what they do, which is both share information, but also signal particular values and collectives, etc.
Thank you. And I think this, do you have time for more questions, or do you think we should move on?
I have time for maybe 2 or 3 more, and then I'll sort of
Got it. Everyone's asking incredible questions.
Oh, good.
I also have. So a few that we've gotten, and I think this goes back to a response maybe to one of the earlier questions, was when you were talking about counter memes or like how to respond to these things. So I think folks just had a clarifying question is, are we proposing that we create counter memes, and who really, are you saying that that's the best way to respond? And I feel like you already answered that, but if you could reiterate that a little bit.
So I'm in favor of meme culture. I don't think that memes are inherently misinformation. I don't think that memes are the sole communication outlet of the alt-right. There are people in our movement and who are, in partnered movements that are using memes to do really good conversation. And the same thing that makes a meme dangerous is what it makes is the same thing that makes it really useful for political communication, which is that it gets more and different people involved, right? So there are individual groups that make memes about really important conversations that happen in politics. Let me give you an example. I'm part of a Facebook group called New Urbanist Memes for Transit-Oriented Teens, and they call themselves NUMTOTS, which is like the acronym. And they're interested in housing justice, transportation infrastructure, and making sure that city planning is equitable and is based in justice. So those are like really big ideas, and they're having conversations about what it means to support people who are not housed, for instance, or who don't have access to safe public transportation through meme format, right? So that's an example of how they're using memes exceptionally well to get more and different people involved in something that's really complicated and nuanced. But memes aren't always the counter memes are not always the answer. We want to make sure that we're identifying what is happening in a meme and trying to respond to that core, which is sometimes misinformation, but oftentimes has to do with an emotional or a values-based approach. And we can respond in that way.
Thank you. One more, or do you think we're good?
Let's do one more, and then I've got some action items, and then we'll do another round of Q&A.
Excellent. So this is from Ayushi, and it says, do you see similarities in the way memes are used and produced these days and old school cartoons that were printed in newspapers and magazines to critique dominant rhetoric? For example, we're still following Captain America, a World War II propaganda hero. How do we utilize memes for such kinds of structural advocacy and awareness? And any other examples that you have?
Yeah, absolutely. And we write about this a little bit in our book, that memes share some important characteristics with earlier forms of visual media or image-based communication. And we link it to, for instance, propaganda, that memes can serve a similar purpose as propaganda. What makes them different and perhaps more powerful is that almost anybody can make a meme, right? Memes are made to be remade by others, and they move so quickly throughout networks that their reach and circulation might be bigger or quicker than other forms of propaganda. And there have been attempts in the past to respond to propaganda through educational campaigns that equipped, citizens, members of the republic, when propaganda was threatening political communication. And we argue actually that we need that for memes. And that's sort of why we're so excited about Digital Defenders, is because you're getting exceptional training on how to counteract some of those elements online. In terms of sort of like old school cartoons and like the resurgence of Captain America, etc., we have a colleague who studies fandom, the idea that fans can be mobilized to do a lot of really important work. Her name is Ashley Kink, and she's written a book about that. So if you're interested, there's some really interesting literature on that question as well. Okay.
Excellent. And I know we have a few open questions, but do feel like some of the responses that you already offered, Heather, tackle some of them.
Awesome.
But just be sure to paste them into the chat so that we can return to them when you get a break from your presentation, okay?
Groovy. Let's return to some sort of action items and key takeaways. We've got about, 17 minutes left. I want to make sure that we have another round of Q&A at the end. Thanks so much for facilitating, Nor. So here are my action items, key takeaways. The first is that you can make a difference in Digital Defenders. You can influence the world positively using tools that many of you are already using, and by learning how to have productive conversations online and intervene in non-productive ones. And that's what this training is. And there's going to be support for you in that work after you graduate as well. Research shows that much of our political communication happens online. And oftentimes, online communication doesn't look political, right? So memes are an important political communications tool precisely because they don't look like they're political, right? They don't look like they're important or that they are legitimate forms of communication. And online communication works in several different ways, and that's something that we need to think about as we're responding to it, that it can inform, that it can persuade, that it can draw people together, and it can pull them apart. And that all of those things mean that you, as a person in an online network, in a community of people online, have influence on your peers, on your colleagues, on your family, on your friends, on strangers on the internet, right, who happen upon your content online. You can use that influence. And that is one of sort of the coolest parts of online communication, but it also has, it means that we have to be responsible with how we communicate online. And so taking steps like this, Digital Defenders training, is a great step. The second key takeaway is that the internet is not perfect. You know that because you're here, right? You can make it better by using its strengths against its weaknesses. On the one hand, increased access to online communication to the digital sphere has brought more and different voices to the conversation, right? It has helped us learn more about each other, helped us keep up with the news, even when journalists aren't able to cover it. It's helped us to organize, right? But it has also empowered really sketchy actors to weaponize the strengths of the internet against others, to spread misinformation, to stop conversation, to stop reasonable debate, and by extension, stop democratic practice, to stop the ability to participate in choosing our own collective destinies and having the agency to do that, right? To encourage verbal or physical violence against folks on the margins. I think this was the conversation that was happening earlier about how different people's positionality means that they have different access to communicate some of those spaces, right? The online communication space has allowed people to move conspiracy theories from the periphery or the outsides to the middle. I think this was a conversation about like pandemic, that conspiracy, and it can make them seem legitimate and make them seem persuasive. And that's, I think, part of the danger of some online communication. And it can empower sketchy actors to radicalize folks who are looking for guidance and answers in an uncertain time, right? So we need you now more than ever. We are in both an election year, right? The rhetoric is already volatile, it's already intense, it's already gendered, it's already racialized, and we're in the middle of a global pandemic where the rhetoric is already volatile, it's already intense, it's already gendered and racialized, and people are afraid. They're charged up, they're skeptical, they're sad. We're in a period of sort of collective trauma and mourning. Some of us have lost people. Some of us have lost access to, modes of employment. People are looking for answers. And there are people on the internet who are really good to provide them dangerous answers, right? Sketchy answers. Our research shows that the far right has a dedicated ecosystem, a network of dedicated hubs to push out misinformation and to make it appear legitimate, even if it isn't. And we need your help to make online spaces productive for conversation again. And you bring something unique to these conversations. We need your voice, we need your location, we need your perspective, because you are an influencer and that authenticity is going to mean something to the people around you. So again, sort of key takeaways: you can make a difference in Digital Defenders. The internet is not perfect, but you can make it better by using its strengths against its weaknesses. We need you now more than ever. We're in the middle of a lot of really politically charged timeframes, and things are intense and gendered and racialized, and they're only likely to get more intense. And you can make that difference with your networks as an influencer. So here's my best advice for how to proceed as we move forward. Here's sort of the actionable stuff. First is take care of yourself. Democracy is a marathon, it's not a sprint. Limit your exposure as necessary. Take time to go outside if it's healthy for you, or pet a dog, or read some poetry, make a cup of tea, meditate, pray. We're in this for the long haul, right? And as Audre Lorde said, caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it's self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. That sometimes means you may have to step away from the screen. You can do that so that you can be effective on the other side of that break. So take care of yourself. Second is respond and recognize people's emotions as well as their words. Fear appeals are very, very persuasive. And research shows that trying to persuade someone, especially someone contrarian, facts alone are insufficient. We must take into account why people are feeling the way that they're feeling and use a values-based approach, which you'll practice a little bit tomorrow and today. Third, as somebody who is doing activist organizing work online, make sure you've got basic digital hygiene covered. So you want to use good, strong passwords, right? They should be different for every service that you use. And because there are so many services that require passwords, they would be ideally managed by a password manager so that you don't have to remember every single password that you ever made, because that's virtually impossible at this point. Second, choose where to be public and where to pull back. Know your security and privacy settings and check with them with some frequency. Now, who you are and sort of you know, how you communicate is going to be different based on a lot of things, including, you know, whether or not you are a person on the margins, whether or not you are operating in a space where you are one of the only people like you in that space. And so knowing where you should be public and where you need to pull back is something that's going to be very individual to each person. And so I want to encourage you to be strategic about that. It's sort of as part of strategy, but also to take care of yourself for the long haul. In terms of knowing your security and privacy settings, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, Teams, all of those have privacy policies that you can read. Many of them are quite long and many of them are quite dry. And so there are other websites that sort of do the a summary of that. You can toggle your settings so that maybe your Facebook is for friends and family only, but your Twitter is public. And that's something that I do, is that for different platforms, I have different people I communicate with. So Facebook is primarily for friends and colleagues. My Twitter is pretty public, and my Instagram is only for really close folks who I want to give that access into my life, right? That's something for you to think about too, knowing that what you're doing in different spaces matters in that way. Keep your devices updated and consider software for virus protection or a VPN that could be helpful. That's sort of like the next step. Make sure you have the other ones done first, which is check your passwords, make sure you know the public and privacy settings of each one of your accounts, and decide which ones you want to be more or less public on. Okay, so now we have a little under 10 minutes. How about we open up additional questions?
Let's do it.
Cool.
So it seems, Heather, that you did add some additional resources on digital hygiene, self-care, etc. So if folks have follow-up questions on that.
Sure.
Wonderful. All right. So I'm going to start off, Heather, with some questions that are lingering from the last session that I think also speak to what you just presented.
Yeah.
So the first one is from Dee, and it says, memes spark ideas and put into gear the communications behavior among different lens. How do we develop and respond to the emotional part of the exchange that is key? Where did you notice that memes got bigger response or a quicker response globally across platforms? Where are we seeing memes really spark?
Yeah, so some memes do better on certain platforms and some memes are cross-platform. So I'm thinking, for instance, the memes on TikTok, which are sort of video-based and visual, might not work as well maybe on Twitter or Facebook, right? Sometimes memes that are specific to a particular community are more powerful within that community than when they move outside of the community. So the example I gave earlier, the new urbanist memes for transit-oriented teens, NumTots, that's a very specific niche interest group for people who care about city planning, right? And I'm way into that because I think that that's a cool space to do justice work. But memes within that spot might not move as quickly as other memes in other spaces. So, you know, the platforms depend on the functionality of the platform. So Facebook has a lot of text for communicating, and that's why many of you, maybe if you're like me, get into longer political conversations on Facebook than you do on Twitter or Instagram, right? It depends a lot on the functionality of the platform for how that meme works. In terms of the emotion question, this is gonna take some, I don't know, some reading of the situation in addition to the meme. So if somebody shares a meme that is based in anger or fear, it might make sense for you to identify both that sense or that emotion or even that value and answer it in addition to sort of like the misinformation that happens in that space. And there are different structures that you'll learn throughout this training about how to do that in a positive way that doesn't get you arguing with trolls, but instead gets you in spaces where you can amplify allies who are already doing that work in a way that you can sort of say, yes, take my thumbs up, right? You're doing the right job. I can amplify that and not just fight with some rando on the internet for 45 minutes, you know?
Great response, Heather. And another question that we got, or a theme that I'm sensing, is around how we get to the other side. So from Rosemary, most of us talk online to others like ourselves, and we rarely cross borders to interact with people with different points of view. I rarely see some of the messaging from the right on the sites that I most use.
Yeah.
How do we reach out to those who we do not agree with?
Well, so the first answer to that is that there's a structural reason why that happens. There are these things, I'm sure you know about them, called algorithms. They help construct what your timeline or your feed, or even how your Google or search engine looks, based on what it thinks is relevant to you. And on the one hand, that's really great because you get things that maybe are more up your alley that you could be interested in. On the other hand, it sort of divides us according to what these particular proprietary algorithms think what we want. And sometimes that means we don't see people on the other side of the perspective. So this is where I would encourage you to be strategic, trying to find alternate points of view, and maybe having conversations with friends who are different than you, but have some sort of shared value. There are particular parts of the internet that have really less than enjoyable memes, and I can like tell you where to find those, but that is kind of something that you would, it's an emotional sort of situation. So my best suggestion is to read sort of widely and make friends with people who have different perspectives than you and engage with them, but know that you don't have to always jump in to the sketchiest parts of the internet, because that can be kind of damaging over time. Yeah.
Thanks, Heather.
Yeah.
So just one other question, I think we can only take one, but I can answer a few of these, is can you address location settings risk? Some virus software requests location access for lost devices. What are the differences in risks depending on platform?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It's something that a lot of activist networks have talked about. There are care packages. I'll see if I can find one for you on privacy settings. To be in public and to communicate in public is inherently going to have some risk to it. That risk is variable depending on your social location. My risk is different than other people perhaps on this chat, and that might empower me or equip me to communicate in particular spaces at particular times. There's something to be said about most of our social media having a surveillance function that could be especially disconcerting depending on where people are. If you have location-based software, theoretically it abstracts you and your individual person from the location, but if you go to, I don't know, a house of prayer, or you go to a protest, or you go to a doctor, that information can be sensitive, and you want to balance the risks of being public with the sort of effect of having some of those software and services. And that's going to be something that is specific to each individual person. I can't make a blanket statement, but if you're thinking about like privacy, and if you're very aware of the information that you're putting out into the world, that is a great first step for moving forward in this space. Just having the knowledge that that information, that there are risks and rewards, is the first step for making change using digital media.
Thank you, Heather. All right, folks, amazing timing. It's 1:45. We're going to take a break, but before that, I just want to bring up a good a good question that we got from Noel. And Maria, you can move to the next slide, which is around any chance Women's March will be developing a cache of memes that we can choose for use. I actually like, you know, wheels are turning, but I do think that one thing we will be exploring is sort of meme creation and how to empower you all to create memes. So stay tuned for that. So we're going to take a 15-minute break. And in the meantime, I just want to say thank you, Heather. I learn so much every time you present, and I really appreciate your expertise and this amazing conversation. So we're going to take a 15-minute break. I would love if you just muted and stopped, muted yourselves, but stayed on so that I can just keep account of who's going on and off. But take 15 minutes, come back, and then we're going to be diving into some of the media readings that you were all sent. And again, I'm going to bump the link to that in the chat box for you to be able to access those readings, okay? And I will see you back here at 2 p.m. Thanks, everyone. All right, everyone, we're going to be starting in just 2 minutes.